I do think this is fitting within a broader, frankly, revolution. So like a cultural revolution that's kind of being put upon the United States. And so it does extend beyond counseling and education and things like that. But like, especially because of what counseling and education provide for somebody like a radical who may want to use like access to people like privately, or people who are particularly young and vulnerable. I do think that we have, it's maybe more intense.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Today I am joined by Katie Kernodle. And is that how you say your last name?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Thank you for joining me, Katie. You are a clinical therapist and writer, content creator, poster on X or tweeting, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Yes, that's correct. I'm a licensed associate counselor in the state of Arizona, and I currently work as a clinical therapist.
Very nice. Okay. Did I also see, are you licensed in Hawaii?
So I'm not licensed in Hawaii, but Hawaii has weird rules where they don't have an associate's level, like license. So until I'm an LPC, I can see clients in Hawaii. Like once I become an LPC, then I can't see them anymore. But like it's this weird gray area
Oh,
where I can see
really?
clients in Hawaii. Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting like loophole,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, it's very odd.
Oh, okay, cool. So tell me, everybody throws around the word therapist. What kind of work do you do with whom and in what way? Kind of give me a lowdown
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah. So right now, I've recently returned to clinical practice. So I'm returned to work at my internship site. So I do have experience there for about a year, but I'm just now restarting, rebuilding my caseload and things like that. So I think that's important just for context.
Mm-hmm.
But I typically work with individuals. I recently opened up to seeing families. I haven't seen any yet, but I am open to seeing families now. I primarily work, I'd say, with like teens, young adults, like emerging adults. I say that age range is kind of my specialty. And I do like a lot for anxiety, like panic disorder, so experiencing panic attacks, depression, OCD, like things of that nature, I'd say.
Yeah, okay, right. I work at a college, small private liberal arts college, and so I'm one of two counselors of about 1,200 students or so. And so I'm right there with you on the emerging adult. It's a I find it to be quite enjoyable and quite rewarding working with
Yeah,
their
I
new
think.
freedoms and all of that.
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult time for virtually everyone. And so it's like a good opportunity to kind of learn just like, how to be an adult, learn how to adjust to like certain, challenges of maturity, things like that. And so I do really enjoy working with that age population.
Yeah. And in addition to being a therapist, where I came across your work was actually on Twitter X, on your page. The kids are not all right.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about what your what is that for people? And I'll link that in the description as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I was in grad school, and I went to New York University, and so when I was in grad school, I started noticing kind of what was going on. We were being taught things from like Paulo Freire. There was like a very strong like intersectionality orientation in our program, and so it was very odd. So once I kind of noticed that something was going on, I was seeing it in the curriculum. I just started looking into it more. This led me to new discourses where I learned a lot more about Paulo Freire and like the history of like intersectional Marxism and things like that.
Hmm.
And once I learned all of that, that's when I decided that I needed to at least contribute in some way to helping people understand it. So in late 2022 is when I started The Kids Are Not Alright, which was both a Substack and a Twitter. And that's where
Hmm.
I've just been continuously publishing research and information and things like that to try to help people, especially parents. I traditionally focus on K through 12 education, but I also, do counseling and psychology and things like that. But to help people understand specifically Marxism as a theology, and helping them kind of navigate what that looks like, how to spot it in education, how to defend against it, things like that. And so, like, I felt called to kind of contribute in that way. I've always been a fairly good writer, fairly good researcher, and so I just thought it would be a good opportunity for me to use those skills to kind of contribute. And since then, yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and I continue to do it.
Right. And so essentially what you're tapping into is this idea, and counseling, mental health therapy has such a left wing, and a particular type of left wing bend, or it's been captured, and by some people refer to like an ideological capture, right? And
Mhm.
in the consequence of that is essentially we're being cut off from all sorts of different helping knowledge that and tradition that has been with our society for ages now, and it's kind of forcing a particular type of narrow direction. Is that a fair way to put
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. I think it's very harmful. I think I would categorize it as anti-therapeutic. So it's basically turning the context of therapy into an opportunity to politicize and radicalize people.
Hmm. And I think if people are honest with themselves, like, this is this is a trend in mental health, but also education, also just in anything really in this kind of public domain in America, and probably the West more broadly. Is
Mhm.
that and you said you started with K through 12 education, and it's kind of branched outward from there.
Yeah, and I think you characterize that accurately because I do think this is fitting within a broader, I mean, frankly, revolution. So, like a cultural revolution that's kind of being put upon the United States. And so it does extend beyond counseling and education and things like that. But like, especially because of what counseling and education provide for somebody like a radical who may want to use like access to people like privately or people who are particularly young and vulnerable. I do think that we have it's maybe more intense for us. Like also with law, I'd say like that's another one where I'd say it's like
Mm.
fairly intense. Yeah.
Hmm. And the law sort of connects to credentialing in our licensing boards, and I don't this might have been you talking about like the counseling compact, and how that's sort of being used to almost like sweep everybody into all the states into a particular worldview, a religion, an orthodoxy, if you will.
Yeah, so the Counseling Compact is basically an interstate legislative agreement where states adopt, like their legislators adopt this agreement so that licenses can be portable. So, like if I were a member of the Interstate Compact, I would be able to see clients in other states that are also members of this compact. So it presents in this kind of way of like license portability, getting people access who might not be able to get it. Like for example, Hawaii. Hawaii is a massively underserved state, and so that's why it's very valuable that I can see clients here in Arizona um, from Hawaii. But
Mm-hmm.
in order to facilitate the compact, you basically have to have all of these states adopting the same credentialing process. So it makes it very like streamlined and of course, like naturally, those that are lobbying for the compact are the ones that are able to access that power. So in this case, it would be KCREP, which is our master, well, generally our masters, but our masters and our doctorate level
Mm-hmm.
accreditor for counseling. Also, the National Board for Certified Counselors, the American Counseling Association, and their ethics, things like that. So it creates a very tight group of total control over the credentialing and education pipeline to get people into positions like counseling. And part of that, so like for example, the ACA has I would say like social justice based, like critical social justice based ethics that
Mm-hmm.
explicitly include equity. Same with the National Board for Certified Counselors. KCREP has an entire section called social and cultural diversity that includes things like intersectionality, queer theory, things that most people would consider to be woke. Um, And I think like the National Board for Certified Counselors also does all of the exams for state licensing. So I'm thinking of the NCE, the NCMHCE. Both of those are done by the National Board for Certified Counselors.
Hmm.
So it basically creates a situation where they're in control of everything and therefore can like enforce a very tight like ideological orthodoxy.
And and when you kind of lay it out like that, it really does feel it's like a totality. They're really trying to go for the total sweeping capture where there's like no stone unturned, no state getting by, and so it and it's funny. It always comes with this bargain of, well, this is going to be convenient. It's going to increase access, right? And I think so many things in our day, so many troubling things in our day get smuggled in under the name of safety, access, uh, in those sorts of dubious terms like equity as well, which really, when you really look underneath the surface of those, they don't they're often very incoherent and really
Mhm.
counter our human nature. And maybe that goes back to what you said about it's an anti-therapeutic ideology essentially.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point that it is against what we know to be true about human nature. So, for example, in the United States, our Constitution is grounded in natural law, and as a
Hmm.
part of that is our individual rights. Things like intersectionality, various forms of neo or other forms of Marxism, all of these are grounded in like a very specific ontology of man that is social in nature. And when I say social, I don't mean it in like the Mott, like the if you think of a Mott and a Bailey, like when
Hmm.
people hear social, like what they're hearing is like, oh, we have social bonds, and it sounds sane. But when they say that you're like a social being, they mean it in like the deepest sense possible, where like you are literally created by your social context, and that's why they think that if you change, like your cultural, social, economic context, that you can therefore change the nature of man. So it is like fundamentally counter to human nature and therefore always fails.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good social in their word is they're really viewing that as like you're part of the hive mind, and they really do believe that, and that is part of these language games of they use these certain words that they sound good on the surface, but then they smuggle in these dubious meanings that have a whole different effect. And
Mhm.
is there any other words that Mott and Bailey? Is there any other like big ones that you've come across that are on
Um,
top of your mind right now in that way?
Yeah, so like one, especially for the context of mental health, I'm thinking of person-centered care. So
Mm,
you'll see this almost as like a thought terminating cliche in a lot of policy documents. And when people, especially like your average therapist, hears that, like they're hearing something very mild and very normal. But like as a general rule, it means like full on, like I think like Rogerian to its core, in the sense of like unconditional positive regard, affirmation, empathy, things of that nature, but like taken to the absolute like max, to where that is like foundationally what's meant to like change the nature of the person so that they could become more fully human. And in reality, like this is, necessarily going to look like things like gender affirming care,
mm-hmm.
um, various forms of affirmation. I think also like mental health is another big one because people hear that, and I mean it's kind of something that we use constantly, but like it has
Yes.
a very like specific definition in the context of like the United Nations, World Health Organization, things like that, where it means more than just like basic psychological health. Like it incorporates all of these other aspects of life and your environment and your society and universal health care. Like basically anything can be kind of like shoved under this thing as like a
Climate change.
mechanism. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a
Mm-hmm.
mechanism for a power grab. So like you're hearing mental health as like, oh, like psychological health. And it's like it's a completely different thing when it's used. I guess the term is like Aesopian language, like using that double language. Yeah.
Yes. No, I think those are good examples. And for those of you listening, I mean, this stuff, it goes, like she says, it goes all the way to the top in the United Nations, and it really, you can really trace this stuff all the way up and all the way back down. And I think they do, there is this trend of taking these terms and really using them to smuggle in. I just think of that word smuggling. They're smuggling in all sorts of things within this cover of language. And person centered is an interesting one too, because there's limits to empathy. And if you've ever sat with a client through that stuff, even any honest therapist knows that there's, being empathetic and affirming really only gets so, gets you only so far. And I I've been reading this book. It's called Therapeutic Improvisation. And
Oh,
so
okay.
let me tell you what I like. This is, I take counseling in a improvised approach, and I think of things that I'm skeptical of things that hurt our creativity and narrow our existence. And I
Hmm.
think that comes in the form of technocracy or ideology. And I think the things that we've been talking about really do try to narrow our existence of in a certain particular way. And in this book, Michael Alcier, he talks about the balance of therapeutic presence with therapeutic authority. Okay, and I think there's a connection there of faith and reason. There, to be present with a client, that requires a certain faith that being present is going to lead to somewhere positive. But that also has to be balanced with therapeutic authority in discernment and reason, and those have to be held in balance and always dynamically moving, whatever wherever the client may be in their particular experience. And I don't know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I definitely want to read that book. I had never heard of it, and I think that
Hmm.
could be really valuable. But I think you strike something really important. I don't think that you can be an effective therapist if you don't have sincere faith that your clients or your patients can change.
Hmm.
Um, but there are going to be times where there's resistance, where things maybe aren't working. You have to adjust. I try to be as flexible as reasonably possible with interventions. So I don't like try to marry myself to a particular theory, and have
Hmm.
that like have my frame kind of like overarch the session instead of starting from the person and what their needs are and like how they're presenting and things like that. But I do think like if you take that too far and you don't have any structure, then it becomes a little bit chaotic. So I think
Hmm.
what you're describing is like holding these things in tension. I think makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I personally like the balance of faith and reason. I think is foundational to like an open orientation to reality. And so, you know, in the context of like a therapeutic session, it's a really important part of the relationship and just in the way that you relate to one another and the way that you model things to your client.
Yeah, and I think there's really clear examples of when you go too far in either direction. If all you have is presence, without any authority, you just become a receptacle of the client's feelings, and the client doesn't really move anywhere. They remain where they are in a lot of ways. And on the other hand, if you trade your presence for, a top down, you're just giving them advice or direction without being present to where they actually are on their in their existential terrain, let's say, then that also creates problems. That's going to, number one, you're going to be trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and many times you're going to miss certain opportunities that you would otherwise find when you are being present in the way. And so I really like that sort of, I think about it like one hand's this and the other hand's the other, and we're sort of casting out and catching things, and we're
Mhm.
it's always this dynamic game. And I am the same way of, I don't adopt a certain school of thought. And I don't know if this has always been like the fence sitter in me, but or maybe it's more of the perennial list in me. But I always, all these theories like psychodynamic or REBT, CBT. I think they're all sort of speaking to a particular. They're trying to speak to a particular reality of the human condition, and I think that's where the creativity and the improv comes in. Is those are resources that we can work with, we can edit them, we can mix and match and or toss aside if it's not working. And to me, that's been a way for me to, I guess, transcend some of this ideological capture, at least in the day to day, in the pragmatic sense of getting out there and seeing clients, getting through the training, getting through. Because I think we graduate. I think, did you graduate 2024?
Yes.
Yeah, same. So we're right. I think
Oh,
we had
okay.
school in the same exact time period there, and so to me that has been really a saving grace to think about therapy as an improvised, expressive communication in a way, and it's almost like a strategic rhetoric uh, encounters with the clients, and we're improvising within reality, and that's the key point too, is we're not just chaotic and random. We're improvising just like a tennis match or a chess game. Is there's a certain reality and we get to play. There's all sorts of moves you can make within that reality. But and so yeah, so I've been on that beat, that improvisation beat for a while. Uh,
Yeah. It's really clarifying for me, and I hadn't thought about it in that particular way. I do really enjoy your posts. I get a lot out of them. I feel like they challenge and give me ideas and things like that. But like when I don't know if you're familiar, and I'm not going to be able to explain it the way that it needs to be explained, but something called model dependent realism, which is I think it's like originally from physicists. I think it's Stephen Hawking and another person in a book called The Grand Design. But it's basically acknowledging that there is a reality, and you can models are ways of kind of like looking and like taking a piece of it, and like
mm-hmm.
models. So therefore, like multiple models can be correct. And
Yeah.
so like I'm thinking, for example, like in the context of therapy, like what you're saying. So, um, like cognitive behavioral therapy, or little bits of maybe like psychodynamic and things like that. Like they're capturing like a particular part of um, the human person, reality, and the therapeutic relationship in different ways. But like the reality that we're like ultimately engaged with is more or less like I'd say pre-reflective. So you're like engaged with this whole. That
Mm-hmm.
whole includes the therapeutic relationship, and then like you're taking these models, and if you don't mirror yourself to the model so much, like it gives you that flexibility to look at things in a different way. um, am I understanding you correctly? Is that kind of like how are you describing
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yes. I think
Okay.
that's another. I've never heard of that particular metaphysics, I guess, or ontology of the model dependent realism. I've been more on just the general metaphysical realism type beat, uh,
Yeah.
and yes, I think that's helpful in because I think that's where, again, to kind of go back to what we started with, is the pure subjectivism is that is not, ultimately that's not helpful, because it eventually you're going to wander off the board, you're going to wander off reality's map, and then the things that you do, even if they have a certain internal coherence, it doesn't map onto reality as such. And I think that's
Mhm.
where people run into trouble, and clients and their defenses and irrational beliefs, and also there's all sorts of things that are trying to drive us away from the reality as it is. And I actually, your most recent article that you wrote for correspondence theory and
Oh
the
yeah.
Substack,
Yeah.
your very first line, I think, puts it so nice. The I've got it right here. You write, the desire to escape the structure of reality as given, to collapse under the weight of the tension of existence rather than endure it, is a perennial human folly. And I just think that really captures it in a really succinct way. And we're there to help clients endure it instead of trying to escape it or to, who knows, delusion their way out of it. It's, or there's all sorts of things in that way. So I really like that article, by the way. And you go on to talk about faith and reason, and that got me to think about the presence and the authority piece, and
Mhm.
connecting those dots there. So
Yeah, thank you so much for reading that. That means a lot. That came out on Monday, and I put a lot of time and effort. It took me months to read through a lot of like Eric Foglin's work, and just really, I had this vision in my mind, and it took me a very long time to kind of hammer it out into a way that's accessible for other people. So I'm really grateful that you took the time to read that. Just to like give people a little bit of context. So I wrote something specifically about like the lived connection of faith and reason. So I was heavily influenced by the political scientist and philosopher Eric Foglin, who has a basically like a theory of consciousness or a philosophy of consciousness of man in between the sort of like imminent, immediate passing world and this transcendent beyond. And so for me, like I'm fairly agnostic about like getting into the nitty gritty of the ontology of like these realms, if you will. Like for me, I'm
mhm.
kind of approaching it from a subjective, like man experiences it subjectively as a pull between these two realms. I think that makes sense to me. I don't think we have to necessarily like worry too much about whether or not the transcendent realm is literally real or not, because it has reality for man, and that's really kind of what matters.
Mhm.
And so like for me, whether or not it literally exists is secondary to like what it means for us and like how we relate to the world. So because we're like rational, like both rational and like maybe more like animalistic creatures, we have both layers to us.
Yes.
We're pulled between these two different ways. So, we want to um like fulfill our various urges and desires and things like that, but we're also aware of the sort of like beyond, that we come from something, we're returning to something, we have a beginning and an end that isn't ourselves. We have a sense of being under eternal judgment. All of these things, we can aim for ideals, we can understand
Mhm.
abstracts. So like all of these things are very challenging for us. So like this is kind of what the tension is. It's like this pull between both realms, and having to be able to endure that. So one way I think we like commonly collapse that is to either like collapse the immanent or the transcendent pole. So like collapsing the immanent pole is basically just rejecting worldly reality, kind of like metastasizing faith, and like wanting, like thinking that the act of sheer faith and the unseen is like what will bring about an immediate deliverance from like pragmatic reality. And then on the
Mm.
opposite end of that is a collapsing the imminent pole, and like completely rejecting anything that transcends reason and like this here and now reality. And I think that also closes us off to the fullness of reality. Like am I making sense?
Yes. No, absolutely. So for example, people who they'll maybe totally shut off, um well, maybe our need for physical movement. Like our body has certain biomechanics that you have to respect if you want to actually paradoxically get unlock maybe higher levels of rationality and transcendence, right? And so there's, yes, we're always in this sort of tension. And I think
Yeah.
there's all these day-to-day little examples that we're always sort of pushing between our mind and our body.
Yeah, and so it's hard. Like I think that it's really important to recognize that like the experience of being human is quite challenging. That we're put in a
Yes.
position where we're pulled in all these different directions. We have the capacity to be rational, but our bodies want to do something else. That's not an easy position to be in. So I think that especially like for therapy and things like that, like it does add a dimension of understanding that the human experience is difficult. We all fail, but we can shift, turn around, and like come back into that middle ground.
Yes. And or another way to maybe say it is, and I had an interview with Dr. Perrin, Dr. Edward Perrin, psychologist. I don't know if you've
Oh
seen him
yeah.
on Twitter. I did an interview with
Mhm.
him earlier this week, and we talked about the hero's journey, coming around and ending up at a higher place than where you started. And so I
Mhm.
think that's one of those deep truths about being human is that whole sequence. And I think we're better off if we honor and respect these things, as difficult as they are, even to articulate as we're trying to do. So, so Katie, you are quite philosophical, and you have quite a good research prowess, I would say. I want to I want to kind of go through, how did you get to be where you are today? Uh, did you always think you were going to be a therapist at this time in your life, or what was 18-year-old Katie? What was she up to?
Yeah, okay. So I initially never really like I never planned necessarily on being a therapist. I majored in Homeland Security for my undergraduate degree. And for
Yeah.
me, like it was I was because I'm traditionally more of like a serious and pragmatic person. That's something like I was kind of thinking about a little bit when you mentioned talking about play. It's just like my personality is kind of serious and pragmatic in that way.
Mm.
Um, and so that seemed like a potentially useful field for me. I like the mix, like I like interdisciplinary things too. So I like being able to pull together religion and history and comparative politics and all these different kinds of things. So I went to Tulane and I took a class, like a just a class in terrorism, and that was just kind of it. I loved doing that kind of work. I connected really well with like the professor, and it's just kind of turned into my major. After that, I got another master's in international security studies. So, kind of staying in that same realm,
Mm-hmm.
fairly interdisciplinary, things like that. So, like for me, I thought I would probably do something along the lines of like intelligence research and analysis, um, like think tanks, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, so like things just for a variety of different reasons just didn't work out. Part of it was that I really hated Washington, DC. It just wasn't a good
Oof.
fit for me. And that's like where
Yeah.
basically everything is. So I had to really just like sit down and think about it. And for me, people had always told me that I would make a good therapist just because of like my personality and just my way of relating to people. People, some people are just easy to talk to, and I suppose I'm one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
She
decided
is.
to I decided to go back to school. I went to NYU online mercifully, so that allowed me to not be in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
But I had like a variety of different health and like issues of that sort that kind of like made it take a while. So I basically from like 2020 to 2024 was when I was in grad school, but that's with breaks. And so
Okay.
it was actually in those breaks where I had this time to kind of like dig into things and started learning more. And that's when I realized like, okay, I really have to contribute something here as well, because as I learned more, this just like comes a point where you know too much and you start feeling like if you obligated to do something about it.
Yeah.
um so yeah, so that's kind of how I ended up both a therapist and like doing my online like the kids are not all right work. And yeah, I worked at a for my practicum I did intensive outpatient. So actually one of the initial reasons for me pursuing the therapy profession is that there's a history of addiction and substance use in my family. And so
Mm.
that's something that I was close to me, and that was one of the initial reasons why I chose to become a therapist. I did an intensive outpatient practicum. Frankly, I did not like it. I thought it was maybe not for me, and I'm grateful that I'm in a different circumstance now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, now I'm like, I will treat substance abuse, but I tend to do more like outpatient kinds of things.
Right. So did you say you worked at an inpatient
Intensive
sub
outpatient.
intensive like an IOP? Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are like a different. That's a different type of work. I
Yeah,
worked
like
at
3 hour groups. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yes. I worked as a case manager before I got into counseling school for a day treatment program for troubled youth. And that is a different beast. And you've got to have a certain way about it, a way about you to really excel there. And there were people who do great in that environment, and it's like that's great. Like, power, more power to you. But yeah, that wasn't for me long term either. I
Mhm.
recognize that. So wow, that's interesting. So you've got two masters in like international affairs, security, intelligence in that realm. But you never really worked in those roles in
No.
particular.
Yeah.
Okay, wow. And so I also wanted to highlight, you said like you had some complications, health things take you out, but you didn't just rot away. You use that time to kind of dig into your research and more. And I don't know, I always think that's improvising with life, right? Because there's no way you could have predicted that. You didn't plan for that to happen, and but I think there's always a way to, I guess, make the best out of your situation. And I don't know, I just wanted to highlight that because I think that's important for people to hear.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like that is something that I learned from that circumstance is that like even if like there was a period of time where I had like a disc rupture in my back, and I literally could only just lay on my side, so all I had was my phone.
Oh
And
wow.
so I was just gonna like find what I could do, even though I can't do very much. Like I'm gonna figure out what I can do productively, like in that context. And so I do think that's like the improvising way of putting it, like really makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just one of those things, is that life and therapy is so unpredictable. Like I think it's really cool to conceptualize it like that. And okay, so to bring you back to the present, would you say is most of your work with clients, or do you spend more time on your writings and research and social media presence, or is it about kind of cut in the middle? Like, what would you say?
So right now it's a little bit weird because I just restarted like rebuilding my caseload. So I spend like a fair amount of time doing trainings, marketing, things like that. So like I'm not
Mm,
face to face with clients as much as I ordinarily would be. But I do like I would say it's fairly well split. I'm trying to cut back a little bit on my writing work because like sometimes it gets to the point where like I don't have any breaks in the week at all. And so I have to like prioritize being able to like manage my physical, my mental health and things like that for my
mm-hmm.
clients. But I do like I set aside particular times where I'm going to be doing other kinds of work, and then um, use whatever time like if I have availability with and I'm not seeing any clients, I'll use that as an opportunity to do trainings and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've got you. Have you do you have a good source of trainings? Like, have you come like I find that that's like a whole conversation of, I feel like a lot of the trainings that are available for continuing ed in that sense are, you really have to find the needle in the haystack on some of
Mhm.
those things. Do you have a good source or an institute or anything that you've come across?
So by and large, I've like been fairly disappointed with trainings. I do think it's pretty difficult. I did take one
Okay.
good one on Pure O OCD from Psych Hub. I haven't done any more with them, but like I did get a subscription, so I'm thinking that it could be a worthwhile opportunity for people because it's just like one flat fee, and then you get access. Because that's another thing is it gets very expensive to do all these trainings too.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I took a decent one with the APA on borderline personality disorder. But like that's all I can really think of. I am planning on taking one on Thomistic psychology that I'm looking forward to, like from the Thomistic Institute of Psychology. I'll see how that one goes, but by and large, it's kind of difficult to find some.
Is that like Thomas Aquinas? Thomistic?
Yeah.
Oh,
Hmm.
okay. I mean, he's one of the goats of faith and
Yeah.
reason, right? He
Hmm. Yeah.
that was his okay. I didn't realize that there was a Thomistic psychology
Hmm.
institute. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I'd say like most of the Thomistic psychology things tend to be heavily Catholic, and like I'm personally not Catholic. I don't know if you have a particular faith or anything like that. So it could feel like a little bit alienating. Like maybe they would just strongly prefer practicing Catholics to be involved. But this particular one, it seems like I'm able to do it, so I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Huh. No, that's cool. I appreciate that. That's cool. Kind of, I guess, in along those same lines is this is a question that bugs me as a counselor, and I feel like nobody answers it. And what role does morality play? Like the whole is what is and what ought to do. And I think people try to talk about evidence based and as a way to guide what we're supposed to do, but I think it's a really silly notion because when you're sitting there with a client, it's like you can go anywhere with whatever they say, and it really is something to do with your moral compass of what you think ought, what's the next step you ought to take. And I think that's ultimately a moral question to help this person, right? And I don't know,
Mhm.
do you have any, do you think about that at all?
Yeah, I think about this a lot actually. So, I mean, I think even just the idea of like what is psychological health has some inherent moral and ethical foundations. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with Sam Harris, who wrote about like objective morality from like maybe a more scientific perspective. I think he's like on the right track. I'm not fully bought in, but I think this general idea of like basic well-being and obviously these are concepts that are a little bit fuzzier. Like that's it's not so scientific in the way that we necessarily want it to be.
Yes.
But I think we like broadly any like people that are just connected to reality and are more or less average like have a sense of what good psychological health looks like and what bad psychological health looks like and just kind of like what well-being is and what suffering is and what like what when suffering is useful and when it's completely not useful, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think that there's some inherent things there. For me, I accept like I believe and accept that there's some sort of like objective moral law beyond me, like beyond humans.
Mm-hmm.
Um, whether or not it specifically arises like from the context of humans or whether like it exists entirely separate from us, I really don't know. For me, like it's the same thing as what I was talking about earlier. Like it really just matters because it's related to humans. So I don't know and I don't necessarily care. um I do think that it's objective and separate, so like we can't change it or like and force it to be a different way.
Mm-hmm.
But like so like that's definitely a guiding thing, but for me like if the moral law is real, then it's like reality is what would convict or guide. Like I acknowledge that my clients have both like the capacity to align themselves with the moral law as well as like the freedom to choose not to, and
Mm-hmm.
then that's their life. So I do think like there's a really important boundary there of like not imposing your understanding of
Absolutely.
yeah.
But see, and I think, but the good faith caution that you have, I think, and that we all, I think most good therapists have, is exactly the wedge that gets hijacked by the moral relativists, who then they swing it to the complete other side and say, well, who's to say entering a 6-person polycule relationship, who's to say that that's not going to be good for my well-being? And they can really put up blinders in a weird way about what is truly what is good, true, and beautiful, which I think is, I like the transcendental aspect of that. That's the way I think about it. And I guess another aspect of that, and you work with emerging adults, as you said, and so do I. What I've found in a lot of ways is not even me imposing a moral compass, but their lack of moral compass, I think, gets them into all sorts of situationships, which causes, which are insecure relationships, which causes them anxiety. I think it gets them into all sorts of weird habits and weird behaviors, such as using porn or using substances without really thinking about, is there a true definitive answer here, or can we just be willy nilly with these decisions? And I don't know. Do you have any sense about that from your experience?
Yeah, I mean I think that's extremely common for that particular age group. And I think part of that is just like what it means to grow up and mature and kind of like trial and error life.
Hmm.
So like as they do these like various things that are generally unhealthy, they have negative consequences because it's not in alignment with, like what is good for them in reality. So as they face these consequences over and over, like they are probably going to figure out that like something like there are better ways of living. And when you
Hmm.
don't, like when it becomes toxic and like a self-fulfilling and like a self-damaging kind of like cycle and things like that's crossing a line into more serious mental illness, in which case like that's what we have treatments and things like that for.
Hmm. Yeah, and I don't know. I think people get weird or icky about morality as such, almost in the same way that they get weird and icky about mortality and being able to really accept death as the greatest teacher of how to actually live. And
Yeah, I mean it's not easy because we are
mhm,
like the one animal, and I use animal kind of loosely there, but like we are the one being that is aware that we're going to die. And that's very difficult. Like it brings with it a ton of neuroses because it's not a easy thing to understand that like you are now and you will cease to be. And
mhm,
so like that split in our minds is very difficult to bear. So I do think it's understandable that we face all of these challenges, and
yeah.
there are ways of kind of learning to use that as a teaching tool. I mean, I think part of what is so valuable specifically about like maybe Christianity or like different forms of religious practice is that it does prompt people on a regular basis to think about death and what that means.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think life is full of those paradoxes. If you want to live, you got to look death in the eye, and you have to really confront it. In the same way of, if you want to be sociable and likable, you have to make space to like other people, and then that's when they'll come to you. If you want to be convincing, you have to let other people have their space too, so that they will also afford you that same space. I think life works in those weird paradoxical ways, and I think that's one of those laws of existence that we kind of have to get a grounding under. And um, do you have a certain skill or something that's, would you say, is overrated in therapy or in life in general? Do you have something that our modern culture maybe is really overemphasizing that you think is it's overrated? It's not as useful as people say.
Do I possess a particular skill, or like am I
Well, you
thinking of
might, but I'm thinking of, do, do you think there's a particular skill that's getting harped on or pushed in a way that is really ultimately overrated?
Oh, yeah. I mean, personally, empathy. I think empathy is just like a part of human nature. It's just like something that we all possess, and it can either be good or bad. Like I think that it's kind of like a neutral thing. It's not
Hmm.
inherently like a virtue. I think that if somebody lacks empathy, like there's a reason why that's a sign for like certain developmental disorders and things like that.
Hmm.
But like by and large, most people experience like have mirror neurons and can, um, relate to one another and I don't want to say like experience other people's emotions, but like we all have the same set, like mostly have the same set of emotions. We can understand other people. And the ability to do that can either be skewed and like damaging or healthy and helpful with like appropriate boundaries. But I think the way
Hmm.
that empathy is kind of framed, especially in modern culture, as like a virtue is dangerous.
Yes, it's dangerous because I think it can be hacked in a real way. It can be exploited
Mhm.
and taken way too, take it takes people off the map eventually without those guardrails. What about something that's underestimated or underrated, a skill in therapy or life in general?
Um, that's a good question. Have you asked this question to other people? I'm wondering what they say.
No, you're my first victim.
Okay. um, yeah, I mean, well, the improv. I mean, I had never really come across that concept before you shared it with me, but like this improvisation, I think that's very important. I don't know if it's necessarily underrated in therapy, but it's certainly not something that was emphasized in my training or my program or things like that. And I think
Hmm.
if it were, it would have benefited me a lot because it would have helped me approach things in a little bit more of a balanced way. So, like when I first started, I was very nervous seeing clients. I would prepare a lot. I would prefer like more structured things. And like as time went on, I found that like balancing those two things out. So like even when I do structure things, like a lot of OCD treatment, for example, like systematic desensitization and
Hmm.
exposure and response prevention, like they're fairly standard. But like within this broad frame, you can kind of engage with people, take things as you need it, like triage, make sure that like the core is always the relationship and like the interactions and things like that so that they can feel comfortable doing these exercises. And so like the improv thing I think is really important and massively undersold. I do think like the average, especially experienced therapist just sort of has it naturally. But yeah, I would say like that is something that's not properly like talked about.
Yeah, I would say if I had to answer my own question, I think play, being a little bit of playful with, like you said, within the broad framework of systematic desensitization, there's some play involved. uh, even like the bridges that we build have a little bit of a play to them. We don't want bridges fully rigid because that's how they're actually will become brittle and will break. But if they have a little bit
Mhm.
of give to them, they're actually a little bit more resilient. Same with trees blowing in the wind. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Something that comes to my mind too is humor.
Mm-hmm.
I like, especially as I've gotten a little bit more experience, and I'm certainly not experienced by any stretch of the imagination, but like,
Mm-hmm.
as especially like with particular clients, like say you have more time with them, so you kind of get the feeling for what is okay and what's not okay. Like sometimes if something is ridiculous, and I would, obviously this is in with prudence. But like if something
Mm-hmm.
is funny to me, I will laugh. And sometimes it just helps kind of like break the seriousness of it. It's like I'm thinking of young adults or teenagers and things like that say they like a boy and he invites them on a date and he like leaves with another person and that kind of thing. And of course, like they're feeling hurt and you can validate that, but it's also hilarious and like stupid. And so like I think laughing a little bit
Yeah.
at like some of the ridiculousness of just being an adolescent and like all of the weird stuff that you have to go through helps them kind of like get a sense that like okay, maybe this isn't so important. And I think
Mm-hmm.
like back
Mm-hmm.
to when I was because I was born fairly serious. So it took me time to kind of get into like what you're describing where like there's a give and not everything has to be like so serious. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I was an adolescent, I think that perspective would have been helpful. So I think like what you're describing is really good.
Yeah. That's so funny because I'm really the opposite. I feel like I was born a little bit more silly, a little bit more loose with it, and I've had to really work hard to be organized, to keep things. I'm much more of a type B when it comes to those sorts of things. So it's no, that's interesting to hear you say that. So I think this is a good segue to Katie. What do you like to do for fun? How do you balance all of this intellectual research and all of that sort of thing?
Yeah, so and I was thinking about this before the interview. And it is a little bit difficult because I think maybe some of the things that I find fun, other people might not necessarily. So like for me, I really enjoy like I like a good lecture.
Mm-hmm.
I like to read. I have like my pet side interests of that like maybe like more nonfiction or like academic books, but like things that are completely unrelated to anything that I do. I enjoy doing that.
Like what? Do you have
Um,
an example?
so I guess like biblical history and like the canon and um like religious history and things like that. Like I enjoy that. I don't have any
Yeah.
like particular stake in it, and so I feel like I can engage kind of neutrally and just kind of learn from an academic perspective. Um, so like things like that. I like to hike. I like to I have dogs. I like to do things with my dogs. So like that kind of stuff is pretty simple, but it's the
Yeah.
good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So you don't get into like fictional writing.
No. And
Is that not your that's not your bag?
yeah, it's not. And so this is actually something I've been trying to challenge myself with is that like if left to my own devices, I won't read any fiction. I like my nonfiction. I like my like more serious academic things. And I know
Mhm.
that I need to like have the other part of my brain kind of engaged. So like right now I'm reading Dune. I'm really enjoying it. It's a really good
Ooh.
book. And like that is probably the first fiction book that I've read and since I had to read them in high school. So yeah.
Oh, that's so fascinating. So that it
Yeah.
really it's almost that does not come naturally. You're really pulled to the
Yeah.
nonfiction side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's so funny. And I think there's something. What about poetry? Are you have
Oh.
do you, is that something you've ever engaged? Because that can be really nonfiction, but it can be artistic and playful in a way as
Hmm.
well.
That's another area that I've intentionally challenged myself into like doing more with. So like reading the Psalms, I consider the Psalms
Mm-hmm.
I think they're like in the realm of poetry. Things like that I think are extremely valuable. My mind immediately thinks like poetry is frivolous, and so I have to like challenge that thought and like get myself to kind of push past it and do some of those things. Same with art. Like I used to think art was completely stupid and like pointless, and now I've completely changed my mind and I love art.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no like artistic talent or anything like that, but just engaging with it as a person I think is really useful. So those two things are like things that I've had to actively force myself to do, and it has been good for me.
Yeah, interesting. And do you find is that kind of expanding your bag of tricks in a way, or like becoming a little bit more well-rounded to
Yeah,
use
I
that?
think it
Yeah.
yeah, it's like more of I mean, not that I wasn't a whole person before,
Yeah.
but I think it's
Yes.
just gives me like a more whole because I'm very rational, I'm very serious.
Hmm.
And like that, if you have to have that balance. So like it does kind of tie into everything that we've been talking about. So I think not letting my mind when I would rather like read a nonfiction to like challenge myself and read poetry. Like
Hmm.
I won't write poetry. Maybe that's something that I need to like force myself to challenge and do. But yeah, I think it's just good for the brain and for your like your understanding of yourself and other people in the world.
Hmm. Yeah. And okay. And do you have any are you at risk for burning out at all, or are you really does this work give you a lot of purpose and drive and meaning? And is it kind of like a are you fueled up right now, I guess I would say?
Yeah, so I mean, I derive a ton of meaning and purpose from both of my forms of work, like the kids are not all right and my
Mm-hmm.
clinical work. Physically, I do have to be mindful of limits there because I do have health issues, and so like I have to make sure that I'm actively like I'm not allowing myself to just push past my limits because like I absolutely can, especially like if I'm doing things like writing, I can just like zone in and like not even feel my like just completely focused and like before I know it hours have gone by. So I have to like actively make sure that I'm careful about that. Maybe somewhere like maybe 2 years into my the kids are not all right work, I started
Mm-hmm.
feeling very demoralized. It felt like the information wasn't getting to people. Um, Things were feeling like pretty chaotic in the political cultural scene, things like that. And so I had to like basically find for myself like some like basically like a spiritual practice and I kind of like
Mm.
struggle to even describe it as that but I like for a while I was kind of exploring Christianity. I think at this point I mean I'm still open to it and things like that but I'm not like currently a Christian and it doesn't necessarily look like I'm going to go that way but I did
Mm-hmm.
end up picking up the rosary like a rosary habit and so basically it's a meditation for me and I find it to be extremely helpful. I don't know how familiar you are with the rosary, but there are basically like different, like each day has a different kind of like focus of the like mysteries. So like you have the sorrowful mysteries and the glorious mysteries. And so like each day kind of shifts and you have five basically like scenes or for me, they're like more like symbols from the
Yeah.
Gospels. And so like I meditate on those particular scenes and like what they mean. And I find that to be like extremely helpful.
Wow. Huh. That's interesting. So I mean, I've heard this from somewhere. I don't know, but like prayer was sort of the OG coping skill.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of one of those. It's one of those just deeply human, contemplation and reflection and meditation. Like that's one of those distinctly human capabilities that we have, and it sounds like you're trying to make it work for you.
Yeah, I think there's some science that shows, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, but like particular parts of the brain that are activated in prayer. And it is like a very uniquely human thing. So I personally, I think if you can find either a meditation or a prayer practice, I encourage my clients if they can to meditate if they, aren't already in like an existing faith tradition or things like that. Nobody ever wants to do it. It always helps. If you can get like into the habit, it will change your brain.
Well, it's one of those things. Is like people have this kind of a weird vibe about it, but you can call it a mantra. And the question I always have is like, what do you think? Why do you think this has been across all religions? Really, uh, humans have stumbled upon this practice of that contemplation, that meditation, the mantra, the prayer, whatever you want to call it. Like they must be onto something, unless you're so unless you're so enlightened compared to all of the past. I do like challenging clients in that way, to just think about that a little in a little more serious way, and not to just dismiss things so outright.
Hmm. Yeah. I have like a small prayer habit like before and after sessions. Like I'll be totally honest, I don't necessarily like I'm not like particularly religious and I don't necessarily like believe that there's anyone listening to me, but it is like a habit that I have and I like whatever is going on in my mind, I think that there is something meaningfully there. And whether or
Hmm.
not like it truly helps, it takes 30 seconds and I think that it's like a helpful thing.
Huh. Okay. Well, Katie, I think we're a little bit over the hour. I think this is like maybe a good place to call it for today. I enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Did you have anything else you wanted to throw in? Where can people view some of your work?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at hide your kids 0. And most of my like real work where it's like formally done is on Substack, which is hideyourkids.substack.com.
All right, perfect. And actually, I'll leave those links in the description of the video for people.
Yeah.
Um, Very cool. So this is kind of a new project for me. This online digital space, and I really quite enjoy doing these interviews. So maybe we'll do a part two somewhere down the line, or I'll. Are you doing any video content, or are you kind of just? I saw you on Ryan Rogers, his channel, and a couple of others. I think. Are you just kind of being a guest doing that sort of thing right now?
Yeah, I'm like most often I'll be open to being guests. But I like for me, I'm just not inclined towards this medium. I'm definitely more of a writer.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate you you coming on, and I appreciate your time on this. And so I think we'll call it there for today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, thanks, Katie.